Welcome to The Backlog, a podcast hosted by ADAPTOVATE. I'm Katie Cords, Head of Branded Content. ADAPTOVATE partners with clients to accelerate outcomes by implementing new transformative ways of working. We are a global firm with offices in North America, Europe, Asia and Australia. In this episode of The Backlog, we feature our US team in an expert panel discussion. Our US Managing Director and partner, Nate Nelson, recently sat down with a few of his team to discuss how businesses can reshape their future to win post-pandemic. Just a note, the discussion is also available to watch on our YouTube channel. Visit youtube.com/ADAPTOVATE. On to the show. Here's our moderator, Shannon Gilliam.
Welcome. My name is Shannon, and I'm an Agile coach and consultant at ADAPTOVATE Los Angeles. Today, we have Nate, Ray, Kayla, and Alan to discuss how do you shape your organization to win in a post-pandemic world and not allow a new normal to be dictated for you. So we have a few themes that we'd like to explore, and let's get started with the first one. So improving customer experience. Nate, what types of complex environments and challenges do we see in our clients post-pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Appreciate you having me on the panel, and I'm happy to take the first question. So I think the theme that I would call out is being able to meet customers where they are. Now, that's not necessarily a new challenge that organizations face. However, there's a lot that has changed during the pandemic, and then looking at what the future may possibly look like, right? Where it's still sort of, I think the picture is still being painted in some ways, but ultimately you'll hear, certain trends around digital first, which we think is absolutely important, is being able to engage with customers in a digital way. And I think the pandemic has ushered or accelerated that. But also looking at how to engage better even in a physical way. I think the expectation really is around being able to meet customers where they are. And in order to do that, you have to be able to adapt quickly, not just during a pandemic, but then also, again, as the picture is being painted on what the new world looks like.
That's a great answer, Nate. Kayla, do you have any thoughts around Nate's response or some ideas of your own about what it might be to meet customers where they're at?
Yeah, two things come to mind. First, sort of amplifying what Nate just mentioned. Now that customers have seen businesses, organizations, nonprofits be required to pivot really quickly in the face of this wild time we've lived in, they know that companies can, and they're going to expect that. And they're going to expect companies and organizations to adjust much faster and be able to give them what they want, give the people what they need. When in the past, maybe they would have expected, customers would have been okay with slower speed to market. It's not going to be okay anymore. And then I think the other thing around improving customer experience is so much of the change that happened was driven by discrete observation of human behavior. And I think more and more companies and organizations are going to need to bring in design thinking, human-centered design, and really observe how the customers are using their products, services, and offerings rather than how they think they're using them, and use that data in an empirical way to make decisions quickly. And I think it's not a challenge so much as an opportunity for our clients and future clients.
Great. Ray, how about you? What have you seen?
You know, at the height of the pandemic in early 2020, we really didn't know if we were going to be able to deliver this type of value remotely. And customers didn't know that either. It was a big test and learn. So as we started to change the way that we work and the way that we connect with people, start to see that, you know what, you actually can build rapport and build teamwork and build leadership via a remote connection. So our clients started to see that right away. And instead of pulling back from us, the way that we saw a lot of changes early pandemic. We're like, this seems to be working. So we were actually accelerating and growing throughout that time. So it's a real testament to new ways of working and integrating with one another and being flexible. As Nate mentioned, meeting people where they are. And right now, we're meeting people at home.
And how do you feel like organizations can provide great customer experience and interactions? Like, what are the tools and tips and techniques that you'd use to make a virtual engagement as meaningful as an in-person engagement?
One of the things on a human scale is to invite people into your environment. And we try to make it kind of cozy. And you can see from our backgrounds here, we're demonstrating something that's a bit cozy, that makes people feel a little bit more warm and fuzzy of the person that they're talking to. We encourage people to use these technologies, such as your cameras and your microphones, to see each other and hear each other in a clearer, better way, so that it's not so robotic feeling. It doesn't feel so different. And of course, the other tools that we have with group whiteboarding and virtual whiteboarding, plus being able to go into a virtual space. So anything that we can do to replicate those environments that we used to enjoy, bringing that into this current environment makes it a whole lot more palatable for people. Even just making that space for it's okay if your dog walks in, if your child walks in, if there's someone mowing a yard in the background, it's okay. It's life that we deal with, and we're still here to do a job and to make some value. So we become more compassionate about one another's experiences that we go through on a day-to-day basis. Found that to be really impactful.
One thing, I probably want to add to that, Ray. You bring up a really good point along with others. So Shannon, if you don't mind, probably add a couple of points there.
Yeah.
I was talking to a healthcare executive recently, and they had given me a pretty staggering statistic. So last year when the pandemic started, they had about, that healthcare organization had about 4,000 virtual visits from their members and their patients per day. Within a week, it went to 40,000. And so they were getting 10 times more patients and more members to serve and to care for in a virtual format, which really pushed them to start to change not only the way they work, but the way that they connect with their members and the experiences that they provide to them. So when you bring up a great question around being customer centric. So when we think about getting care, being able to take a picture of a scab on your skin or something, something like that, and being able to take a picture and send it to your doctor and get immediate feedback is amazing, right? I could go into the doctor's office, wait for an hour and a half, and see the doctor in a much longer time frame versus like taking a picture and sending that over. So a lot of organizations have had to not only rethink the way they work, but they've had to rethink what the experience is like for the members, and especially members who are who have issues while they're not mobilized, right? That they can whether maybe they're in a car accident, maybe they're at home, maybe they're in a different environment. Being able to connect with your provider in different environments, we have to take into account for what that experience is like and what they're going through when they're not at the doctor's office. So amazing levels of complexities that we have to solve for, I think, in the future, especially in the care in the healthcare space.
I'm curious to know, in pre-pandemic, these would have been, for some organizations, just insurmountable obstacles that they wouldn't even have considered tackling because they didn't need to. And now that they have, and they've found successes to one degree or another in being able to be remote, what do you think are some of the challenges for redefining what normal looks like for them? What are going to be the successful criteria for really reshaping how we interact with our customers, how we interact as an organization going forward.
One thing comes to mind, and thinking about what Ellen just mentioned about the change in the product offering that happened overnight because it had to. When we have companies ready to take on those challenges, they really need to have cross-functional teams in order to solve those challenges quickly. And I think that is something that sometimes many organizations weren't used to, that they'll need to bring forward. So if I think about that instance, for example, about the virtual visits, like you need, in order to solve that problem quickly, you need business, you need tech, you need UX, you need cyber, big issue, cybersecurity, you need legal, regulation, compliance. You need all those people in the room at the same time to make decisions quickly. And if that doesn't happen, then you're not going to be able to improve the customer experience, and especially not at the pace at which you want to. So that's one thing I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's not that these are necessarily new challenges. I think engaging with customers in certain ways may be a bit novel or new, but overall these aren't new challenges. And I would like to underscore what Kayla had mentioned. And in some ways it's looking at, what is the customer problem that we're trying to solve, or the experience that we're trying to create or delight for a customer, and almost working, backwards in that, okay, what are the types of capabilities that I need on the team to do this? And then we look at agile principles and how we might leverage those to say, okay, well, what do we know that works? Well, dedicating team members with cross-functional capabilities to a team allows us to have more clarity and focus and prioritization and what we are trying to do, and looking more at the end-to-end experience. And it doesn't matter if you're building a product or a service, or quite frankly, both, right? And that happens a lot, where there's a product, but there's also services provided around that product. But really looking at that entire value stream or life cycle, dedicating the team to do that, creating that clarity, and then for lack of a better term, forcing that team to communicate in short spurts on a daily basis versus larger meetings that may happen once a week or once every 2 weeks. And so really looking at things like outcomes over outputs and communication over processes and tools, and cross-functional capabilities to really drive things a whole lot faster, and quite frankly a whole lot better for a customer.
Ray or Ellen, do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
Sure, I can pop into there. One of the things that we bring in terms of agile ways of working is a direct customer focus, and identifying who your customer is in the first place. There's been so many times where I get together with a group of leaders from a large corporation, and we get into a whiteboarding session, and let's figure out who we're trying to serve. So I'll ask each person to fill out a sticky note, go to the board, and put it under who is the customer that we're solving. And if I have 9 or 10 people in the room, I'll have 7 or 8 answers of different customers that we're trying to serve. And that's the first indicator that, we're not on the same page of what we're trying to do. We got to figure out who we're trying to serve and what they need. Many of the times we try to figure out what we need to do for them. And as leaders, we're like, I think they need this, I think they need that. So we end up making requirements and handing them down to people versus really involving them in the process. So we find that using some of these agile ways of working helps you to do something so simple. Identify who is it you're trying to solve for, what is it that they need to be solved, and what's the real value of delivering that. Once we're all on the same page of that, it's much easier to go forward with any process or any mechanism that we're going to use to drive value.
Yeah, and I was thinking of that with some answers previously. Do you feel like the pandemic has given organizations an opportunity to actually really connect with a customer versus making assumptions on their behalf?
Mhm. I don't know if the pandemic has made that change itself, but definitely in bringing forth these new ways of working exposes that right away. These are challenges that happen in every organization. They may not even realize that they're happening. There's nothing wrong with saying, I know what needs to be done, and I can tell everybody what needs to be done. But it's so much better to say, well, I know who we're trying to serve, and I know what challenges they have. Now, team, how might we solve those challenges together? That's a completely different mindset of just give me the requirements and I'll go do it. To now, let's work together to try to figure that out. And whether we're doing that at home via Zoom or if we're all in a room together, it shouldn't matter quite as much. But I think this pandemic has given us the opportunity to focus deeply into this screen or this virtual environment and start to figure that out together.
It makes me think about how the pandemic maybe has shaped each individual's humanity and their own sense of empathy, because we've gone through this collective challenge together. And working at home, they're able to understand a little bit more about maybe the day-to-day experience of their customers, because they maybe lived in their shoes more and they didn't have some of the options that they might not otherwise have. So it makes me think that we're going to see less of that command and control and more of this inviting the team, inviting the customer in to solve the problem collaboratively and with vulnerability and courage, because leaders realized that there was a need and a moment to role model vulnerability and courage and risk-taking throughout the pandemic. So that's my hope for organizations and society, is that organically we'll have even less of that. And then you could, employ some agile ways of working, new ways of working by design to accelerate the embrace of that culture and those mindsets.
Yeah, the one thing that comes to mind as kind of being coaches and putting our coach hat on is, we constantly encourage organizations and their teams to be more curious. And how that plays out is, we run design workshops, and this kind of piggybacks on what Ray was saying earlier, is we don't necessarily start with what is it that we know and what can we do with what we know. We really start to think about the customer and what is it that they want and what their journey looks like. So we will often, do journey maps and use other types of tools to really empathize and understand what the customer's experience is. And then we look for opportunities where we can make a difference as a team, and what are the changes that we can deploy. Oftentimes I've found teams will come in saying, this is the knowledge and experience I have, so let's solve the problem from what I know, versus let's solve the problem for the customer. Let's solve the problem that we can solve for the customer. So applying design thinking, design workshops, getting people into the room, and oftentimes getting the customer into the room. I can't recall how many times I've walked into a design workshop where there's no customer in the room. And we're really talking about the customer without the customer in the room, whether it's virtually or physically. So bringing the customer into the room and really having an honest and open and curious discussion about what the pain points are really allows organizations and teams to create the opportunities that are very specific, very valuable, and very, as Nate said, outcomes driven rather than outputs driven. So it's been a transformative experience and really opened a lot of eyes, bringing customers into the process.
Yeah, and I would just add, it's a great point. I mean, they're many of the, call them winners out of the pandemic, or companies that have been adaptable, right? That have been able to adapt and have either increased or improved their market share, or have ventured into new product or business lines, are companies like, take Amazon or Google. And Google, we know, does this really well. They have a formula for not only bringing customers in quickly up front, but then also prototyping. And that may be sketching to start with and moving more towards a digital prototyping of a product over time. But just to get really tactical, sort of flipping the way that you think about it, which traditionally might be let's figure out, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? Let's get a team together. It might not be a dedicated team because we have a lot of priorities. Let's start building some requirements around that, and so on and so forth. And next thing you know, we're weeks, if not months into the process. Let's get a more nimble, cross-functional, dedicated team together, bring in the customer, do rapid, prototyping or sketching to get rapid feedback from the customer up front, which ultimately brings a product to market faster and sort of flips the, perhaps the paradigm on how you go through something like this on its head. And I think if you look at, what does the picture that we're still painting on what the new normal will look like, I think adaptability is going to be one of those key attributes that companies of all sizes will need to aspire to, along with resiliency. Unfortunately, there will be business interruptions. We sure hope it's not to this scale or magnitude that we've dealt with in the last year. But having an adaptable organization that you can pivot or you can quickly, more rapidly respond to a new customer need that either was lower priority or, quite frankly, wasn't even there in the past, is something that all businesses are, have gone through and will need to go through in the future, is figuring that out.
That's a great segue into our second theme, which is actually around faster product life cycles. So a lot of what I'm hearing is just around the importance of making a customer-centric decision for your organization, and then how to actually engage with that customer. And we know that Agile can help us unlock better ways to serve our customers. Hey, Ray, how do you think it affects an organization internally, especially when it comes to faster times to market or innovation?
The idea of short feedback loops is a concept that we try to bring in often for organizations. People have a tendency to say, well, if we just had more time, we could probably build more or do more, and then we'd have more to show. But our way of thinking is, well, why don't we actually use a shorter increment of time and break that work down into something smaller that we can test and learn at a shorter interval. I mean, this is all a learning experience for us to be able to flourish new innovation or new ways of working at a corporation. So testing it out, being able to get feedback from other stakeholders and other people who are involved in delivering that value itself gives you so much better of an understanding of what's going to work around the rest of the organization. How might we pilot this in a couple of places to see how these shorter intervals or these shorter time scales work? And then let's try replicating that to some other parts of the organization and see how we can accelerate that value by scaling it to other areas. That mindset may miss some because it doesn't follow the traditional project management model of, let's refine all the work and then try to deliver it all. But if we can deliver a small sliver of value and understand why did it work or why didn't it work, it gives us so much more data to go into the next planning for making the next increment even better.
And can I ask actually all of you to share maybe how you've seen this implemented with different clients?
Sure. There's it's interesting, right? So one of the clients that we've got, they're essentially reinventing themselves, and they are entering into markets that they haven't really entered before. So they're really in uncharted territory. So this product, accelerating products to market becomes even more important and more complex when that's not even a market that you've really been in. So what we do is we've taken two approaches to this, right? And it's more of a programmatic approach. So we get the big picture and we try to figure out with the client, what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to achieve more from a strategic perspective? What that allows us to do is on every quarterly cycle, be able to come back and see if of all the work that we're doing, does this still make sense or do we need to do something different? So there's a quarterly cycle that allows you to look at the big picture. And then we establish smaller cycles, as Ray was kind of alluding to, which are 2 to 4 week cycles, where we're actually delivering and doing the work to get the product into the market. So imagine every 2 to 4 weeks, you're getting feedback, you're learning about your customer, you're finding out what's working for them, what's not working. But at the same time, on a quarterly basis, you're collecting all of this data and making a decision on whether this is the right direction for the organization or do they need to go into a different path. So there are two components to it. There is a strategic, there is an ability to have strategic agility on a quarterly basis, and there's an ability to have more execution and implementation agility on a shorter basis. And this has worked quite well in the organization. And again, it's a test and learn opportunity, both at the senior executive level as well as the team level. But as Ray alluded to, having that continuous feedback and that open dialogue between implementation teams and strategy teams is what makes it work.
We have a financial services client, global Fortune 100 client. And when we're looking at how do we restructure or how do we help coach and design and partner on new ways of working, there is generally a light bulb moment that happens. And it's really around mindset shift. And we are able to achieve that in a few different ways, but ultimately when the leadership and the teams start to realize really sort of the incremental nature in the feedback loop, techniques that we use that, to Alan's point, maybe a week or a 2 week feedback loop if we look at what we call sprints and agile. And by the way, doesn't have to be technology, right? You can apply this, and we do all over the enterprise. There's some training that happens, there's some modeling that happens, and then when clients sort of experience it for themselves, there's a light bulb moment in there. A lot of times where we see sort of this look or this expression on their face in terms of being able to incrementally deliver something that we can get feedback on in a couple of weeks, which at a large, Fortune 100 financial services company that often, this may take weeks, if not months, to be able to test something. This is a huge shift, right? It's a transformative shift in how they work. So then think about how do you do that across, multiple teams and multiple products and services. That's going to greatly accelerate, your speed to market and then also delight the customer. So just an example, you can, apply this to certainly outside of technology, which is what we do, but, virtually every industry as well, right?
Yeah. And that makes me think about not just external customers and clients, but many times in a large organization, you have internal clients. And when people are working together to be able to solve problems in a cross-functional way and to do that with the mindset of progress over perfection, and to do that with less reliance on documentation and more focus on the conversation and actually making change, then you're able to deliver much faster. And I'm thinking of a different global 100, Fortune 100 financial services firm. And I worked with two different teams, one that was large and cross-functional, or not cross-functional and not dedicated, not focused, and one that was small, nimble, cross-functional, speaking every day. And they basically were developing a prototype of the same regulatory document. So again, like Nate said, not limited to tech. You can do, agile with compliance and regulatory and those types of environments. They were able to address the problem and put something out to customers and get customer feedback within 3 weeks, whereas the other one, it was over 3 months.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the big tenets of Agile is around communication. And one of the things that I've seen with Agile is while you are having an opportunity to speak more frequently, you're getting into that habit and you're developing better communication skills and habits. And organizations that are reluctant to get together more frequently, like using stand-ups or using some of the other ceremonies that Agile provides in order to have these moments. You know, how are traditional organizations or organizations that want to continue on with the way they've worked with a weekly status meeting or, you know, really limited communications, how are they going to be falling behind organizations that have embraced and now understand how important those small bits of communication are?
Yeah, for a lot of organizations, you know, it is going to be a test and learn for them as well. And when we see that going forward, it's not an overnight shift to just all of a sudden start doing these things. It does take some change in people's behavior, and that's part of not just knowing the process, the fluency of the process, but how do we have the maturity of actually using the behaviors in a day-to-day basis of bringing these ways of working into our fold. A big part of the proficiency that comes from Agile, as Shannon mentioned, is the communication. You get a communication boost immediately. And that resolves so many challenges. I've worked with organizations that would tell me there's an impediment because I have not heard from Bob. Bob hasn't given me the details that I need to move forward. And I've seen teams to struggle for days and weeks over Bob. We haven't heard from Bob. But then we find out that Bob is actually upstairs. Bob is 2 stories upstairs, and maybe he's not responding to email, but just a simple thing of getting up out of your chair and going up and talking to Bob and getting that answer may help move us forward. So sometimes working with team members is bringing forth some very simple communication techniques. Get up out of your chair, go talk to that person, make sure that's resolved. Or instead of assuming that 2 people need to get together to come to a solution, maybe it's that someone needs to join them in that conversation to ensure that at the end of this conversation, the goal is to come up with a solution for X. And that's a forward-thinking management model that we would use to teach managers or leaders in this case, how do you accelerate value regardless of what framework you're using? You know, how do you have action-oriented statements that you give to your team members of here's what I expect and here's a time frame that I expect it in, and giving them the tools to be successful in delivering that. It goes so far in accelerating value, even more than putting in a new process or a new way of working, just having that one thing brought in.
So you brought up a good point about the opportunity to get up and go talk to somebody. But with the pandemic, that hasn't been a possibility for most of us. In what ways, you know, does Agile support, or have you seen at clients where being forced into a completely virtual environment has evolved the way we are reaching out to each other?
If I can probably take this on, I've had an interesting experience with one of the clients we're working with. So we moved from working in the physical environment pre-COVID and then post-COVID went into a virtual environment. The team got used to being able to walk over and see each other and ask questions, and especially in this case, you know, so Agile has this role called a product owner who really helps to decide on priorities. And so this team was very reliant on continuously having discussions on priorities and what good looks like. So being able to physically meet was fantastic. So now in a post-COVID, what do we do? How do we still have that conversation? So this product owner specific person decided to have what they called the product owner office hours. And so they just dedicated a certain amount of their time in the week, because as many of us have experienced, we might be back to back in meetings and there just isn't allocated time to talk to people because you're just between meetings. And so they dedicated this time to talk to, they dedicated this time to talk to each other. So the product owner would say, okay, in a week, I've got 2 hours dedicated 1 hour each day for anybody to come in and ask me any questions that they might have, so I can help them and support them better. So that was one thing that was really great. And it really came from having that ability to have that deeper connection, deeper conversation in an agile way, but setting aside that time virtually, they carried that over from that experience that was more on site.
Great, that's a brilliant idea. Have any of the rest of you seen ways in which teams and organizations have improved in that?
Yeah, I think for a lot of the clients I've worked with, they're globally distributed. And because of that, the information sharing can be difficult if there's small periods of overlap hours. So having a asynchronous place where we're putting the work that needs to be done and writing them in what we call user stories and making sure those stories are really clear about why the work needs to be done has allowed, I think, team members who are in other parts of the world and not necessarily communicating, be able to pick up those and work really quickly.
I guess what I would add, around, thinking about communication, let's say, and being able to do that in a physical way. And during the pandemic, that became a lot harder. As we think about some of the larger clients that we work with, they have distributed teams, and they have had for years. And so they've been faced with this challenge over time. And I think, one thing that has come out of the last year is all of the different collaboration tools that we have available. And in some ways that may seem overwhelming, but figuring out the right technology to be able to improve collaboration has been extremely important. And as we've virtualized in a lot of ways over the last year with our clients, we've been figuring out how to leverage that even more. And that has been, very important. So there's certainly a technology piece of that, but then I think it also goes back to the mindset shift. And as we think about, I should say, how do we create more opportunities to communicate and collaborate? And let's leverage agile principles to do that, perhaps through stand-ups. And as we think about, feedback loops and things like that, all of that is, there are lightweight techniques or processes around that, but it's also a mindset shift as well. And so it has been challenging to figure this out, but in a lot of ways, companies have been grappling with this for quite some time. And now we're at a point where technology is not a laggard in this. Now it's more about mindset shift, I think, and then to some extent, processes or maybe even culture, if you will, in terms of how the organization works.
Yeah, the idea with Agile about having co-located teams, which was an original part of the Agile Manifesto, and that was really, I think, driven for a long time. And the pandemic really showed that you can succeed without it. And I know that the struggle with having co-located teams has been a driver toward our third theme here, which is around retaining and recruiting top talent. If you must have a co-located team, you either have to find talent that's willing to move, or you have a much smaller pool of applicants and opportunities to really hire the best. Going forward, post-pandemic, what do you think that's going to require in order to recruit and retain that top talent, as the pandemic has proved that people can pretty much work from anywhere?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Shannon. I think about, as we look at the new normal, not only are we looking at how to better serve our customers, but also how to serve our employees. So employee experience is just as important, and in some ways maybe more important than the customer experience. There has been let's say a war for talent even prior to the pandemic. And employees are looking to work at an organization where they feel like they are attached or inspired by a purpose. And I believe that the, agile ways of working is perfectly set up to allow you to align, what you're doing, the value you're bringing, to what the purpose is of that customer objective and of what business that you're in. What does the organization serve, right? What is your vision and purpose as an organization? And so that's one component of it. And there are many others if we think about, pushing decision-making downward, which is the antithesis of command and control. Having more focus and being dedicated on a team, which allows you to, create more mastery in what you do, right? And then also the autonomy component. So we do think about mastery, autonomy, and purpose as part of benefits or outcomes of leveraging agile ways of working. And employees, will vote with their feet in terms of where they want to work, which culture they want to work in, and really being not only attached but inspired by that purpose or the why.
So looking ahead, how do companies make that shift to a more agile way of thinking and behaving? What are ways that they can incorporate those values either for themselves or for their employees or for their customers?
We've talked a lot about improving the customer experience, speeding up product life cycles, and also retaining the best talent. But looking ahead, in order to accomplish all three, corporations are going to have to make environments different for people. Employees especially, it's not just about pay. People have choices of where they can go and work, especially as the pandemic is lifting and organizations are hiring like crazy right now. There's lots of opportunities out there. So to maintain that talent, thinking ahead of how do we keep the best talent to maintain the momentum that we've got going, creating challenging environments, making sure that corporate values are evident in the type of work that people are going to be doing. What company can I work for that exemplifies the values that I have as an individual? That may be part of my decision of whether to stay with the company or to go to a different company. And I think corporations are going to have to think about that going forward, that it's not just because people need a job or just because we're hiring, but it is because we are a great place to work. It is because we have a challenging environment. It is because we offer autonomous opportunities for growth and development within our company. So looking ahead, companies have to make sure that it is attractive to be part of their environment, as well as we're moving the needle. We're actually accelerating value to market. Sometimes when you talk to people, they may not realize the importance of what it is that they're working on. We have a large energy client, and some of the people on teams that we're working with, like, you guys are solving renewable energy challenges for the next decade. Like, this is really exciting stuff. So it's not just we're doing Scrum tasks or Agile tasks in a 2-week cycle or something. We're solving financial challenges. We're solving energy challenges, people challenges, and creating best places to work at the same time.
I think I want to echo everything Ray said. The more you can engage your employees in helping them make meaning of what they do will be critical as a differentiator. And creating cultures and environments that model practices that are aligned with agile ways of working, such as more autonomy, more empowerment, more courage and openness and transparency, and a focus all on impact will be key. Yeah, and if I think about how do we enable that, how do we create that culture and that environment, if I'm a leader in an organization wondering, what do I do first? What do I do next? I think one of the best ways to get started is to start. And we often have clients start by doing an agile pilot, and that involves us going in, identifying opportunities that could be addressed through agile ways of working or new ways of working, and bringing in some of our agile coaches and doing training with both leadership, folks on the ground, helping set up cross-functional teams, helping them learn this new way of working and really expedite change. And then that becomes a proof point, and we're able to expand that over time till we get to a point where there's a tipping point and you really feel the change and the acceleration of value in the organization. So first thing to get started is to get started, and that's what we're here to help you do.
Thanks, Kayla. Well, just to wrap up, I'd like to thank all of you for coming and participating and answering questions on this really pertinent topic right now about shaping your organization post-pandemically and not allowing the post-pandemic new normal to shape you. If you have interest in learning more about agile ways of working or how we might be able to help, please reach out. You can find a ton of information on our website at www.adaptovate.com, as well as following us on LinkedIn or Instagram. Thanks so much.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you
Very much.